You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half of the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Just when we started to figure out millennials, we have a new generation to sort out. Generation Z. They are hitting your stores, whether as shoppers or as employees. So really the key is to learn how they think, what they react to, what their job expectations are. And there's a lot at stake here because they are 1/4 of our current population. So we're going to spend some time today and we're going to talk about leadership strategies and approaches you can do to take advantage of this new emerging generation. Welcome to Convenience Matters. My name is Jeff Lenard with NACS.
And I'm Carolyn Schnare with NACS.
And we're joined by phone today with Carrie Ann Gomez. She's the Vice President of Strategic Value for the Network of Executive Women. And they have a report looking at what's going on with Generation Z. So welcome, Carrie Ann.
Thanks so much. I'm glad to be here.
So this report that the Network of Executive Women put out, you went at it very deliberately in looking at, here's some things we want to test, here's some things we found out. Do you want to take us through the process of why you wanted to investigate this generation and how it might apply to people in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. So as we were looking at the research that was out there on Gen Z, we thought it was pretty generic, and it led you to some conclusions that the research team thought, I don't know if those are exactly true. So we decided to take our own test on the hypotheses that were out there. If you read the research that was out there, it would lead you to think that the Gen Z worker was going to finally be this worker that companies were looking for after the millennials, where we saw the hype around they want to go be the CEO before they've even worked in their first analyst role, or they don't want to even be in a company, they want to be entrepreneurs. And so finally, here's Gen Z, who's going to be a very compliant worker that's going to work lots of hours and is going to be really loyal to the company. And you can pretty much treat them like they're at their desk and they're chained in there. And that's not the case at all. And so we said, we really want to dive into different things that the other surveys had taken a look at. And so we created a list of 9 hypotheses that we tested with our research.
Boy, those poor millennials get a bad rap, don't they? So this was the generation that was aspirationally supposed to fix all the problems that the various other generations have variously been blamed for. What were a couple of the hypotheses that you went in with that you thought were really compelling to investigate and determine, are they true or are they myths?
Yeah, so a couple of them were around career aspirations. And so this hypothesis was around they prefer to work in industries that they interact with in their personal lives opposed to industries that they aren't frequent consumers of. So think, I want to go work for a retailer, go work for Amazon rather than an oil and gas company. The second was around career development and kind of following on to the millennial entrepreneurship. We were looking at to see if whether they desired diverse and entrepreneurial opportunities within the safety of a stable employment. The third was around their working styles. You probably see some of the jokes where Gen Z, they just want to talk to their phones and they don't want to actually have interpersonal relationships at work. And so we looked at whether they preferred individual tasks over team-based activities. And then we looked at their core values, where it's much more important with these newer generations that they form their opinion on a company, not just on the quality of their products and services, but also on the company's social impact on those ethics and practices. The one was around education and learning. So Gen Z is reevaluating the cost benefit of traditional education. So this was one of the hypotheses that was not true, was that they're reevaluating whether they should go to college or not. And actually that one was false, and so we can talk a little bit about that later. And then we also looked at whether they were proactively seeking out learning opportunities. And most companies are shifting to a lot of online learning. And so we thought, gosh, that's probably how Gen Z wants to learn. And that's not the case. So that was one of the other ones that we tested that was not true. Then we looked around their attachment to social media, and that does have implications on how they interact with others and how they want to be perceived. And then the last one we looked at was that Gen Z is defining diversity along different lines than the generations before them. So that was also one. And I actually missed one a little earlier, which was around was that they will prioritize financial security over personal fulfillment. And that one we said was true with a caveat as well.
So let's talk about the college education or the education in general that you talked about. So in our industry, in the convenience industry, we have a lot of employees who are shift work, who are working within stores, who may or may not need a college degree. But we also have headquarters staff who may need that, or they may work their way up through the ranks, which we find often happens. They'll start as a store clerk and then end up as a manager. And then next thing you know, they're running HR for the company in a few years. So this industry specifically is one that doesn't necessarily rely on a college-educated background or a degree, but obviously we will rely on Generation Z at some point. So as far as like industries, retail industries, and in perspective of this report, what kind of advice, I guess, would you have for retailers or listeners in terms of how can they know more about the generation that's upcoming, as well as maybe change their style in order to work more with them?
Yeah, absolutely. So there definitely are two paths, as you've indicated. That there's one path that is up through the retail outlet, and then there's the other path that comes in corporate. Overall, again, these are generalizations for a large generation, but overall, we found that they are not reevaluating whether college is valuable or not. They believe that the more that they can educate themselves, the more skills that they gather, the more beneficial that will be in their career. Because they watched perhaps their parents or their older siblings struggle through the financial crisis, Gen Z looks at education and upskilling as a tool against being downsized or being able to be much more flexible through any sort of downturn. What's different about them is that rather than trying to find the absolute best college, they're looking more for value. So the name brand of the college is less important than making sure that I'm going to come out of this college with the skill sets that I need to be successful, with a varied set of skills, but I'm not going into this massive amount of debt to gather those skill sets. So that's one thing. When it comes to the C-store employee, somebody who may or may not be going to school, regardless, Gen Z is really interested about having a varied set of experiences. And I think when you look at how job descriptions are today, they're very one-dimensional. You're going to be a cashier, or you're going to be stocking, or you're going to be whatever that is. You're going to be filling the shelves, and you can pitch the C-store experience as a way to learn how to be an entrepreneur in a setting rather than just looking at singular skill sets. And you don't need a college degree for that. You can learn these skill sets within a store. And I think if these stores really pivot around how they're positioning an opportunity, or how you can grow, or how you can leverage those skill sets that you'll learn within a store, it's not just being a cashier, just shelving or stocking the shelves. That might be a way to attract more people into, really great employees that build loyalty with a company, and they may or may not want to move up through the organization.
And that's something I think you're increasingly seeing our members just focus on, is what is it? It's not a job, it's something else. It's giving back to the community. It's your ties with your customers, etc. I want to hit on something that I thought is extremely interesting about this generation. And by the way, this report defines Generation Z as born between 1995 and the year 2012.
So at roughly the year when we're recording this, which is 2019, those folks are 24 ish, and also 7. So there's a big growth period in what between the 7-year-old will be doing the next time we have this conversation in episode 732.
When you look at and you talk about some of the things that they faced or have not faced, I think some of the conversation has been they really haven't faced significantly bad times as adults. We've had a very long period of sustained economic growth, very low unemployment. As they hit the job market, that's what they've seen. But what you had mentioned earlier is the recession impacted their lives greatly in their psyche. And are there two different stories related to the recession? Because since the recession, a good segment of the population is doing very well, whether they have money in the stock market or they've advanced. And there's another part of the population that is relatively stagnant. Are those experiences playing out in Generation Z, or are they a little bit more uniform with how they think?
That's an interesting question. We didn't look at that, and specifically in our study. What I think you see is that for those that did watch their parents struggle through that, they're doing everything that they can to be able to prepare themselves to weather a storm if one is to come. I think for those that did have their parents were well off and they were able to weather the recession in a much more recession-proof household, you're seeing that generation take a much more social aspect of being much more conscious around. I want to work for a brand that has a great social presence, that's helping with climate change, that's helping their communities. Whereas if you had to really struggle to survive, that's probably less important for you. And what's more important is that I've got opportunity, I've got stable employment, I'm learning skills that will make me be successful in other areas. And they're taking much more practical approaches than those that didn't have to struggle through that.
That makes sense. I think, this generation was born just before or became to where they could actually pay attention. Let's say when they're about 10 years old, they start paying attention to the world around them a little bit more, maybe a few years younger. But this was post 9/11 for the most part. A lot of these kids there's been a war, but it hasn't been too effective to them, hopefully. So there's not the same things that were happening to the millennials that lived through September 11th and therefore have a different sense of security, I think, as you were mentioning there. But I'm going to pivot a little bit, and we're going to talk a little bit back more to the survey or the study itself. Now, one of the things you talked about is, or it says in there, is their work is less of a job, but instead more around the employee's skill set, just like you said. But then that essentially shifts a balance of power between an employer and an employee, where it's is it like crushing the hierarchical kind of workplace? Is that where you're basically going, where it's a flat workplace, or is that something that retailers or any company for that matter should look more into?
Yeah, I don't think it's the thing where employers are going to have zero power or anything like that. As you're looking for top talent, those employers that are being much more innovative around how they approach talent will have that advantage around getting that top talent. What it's more around is that, in any organization, there's usually a job description, right, with a long list of requirements and some sort of hierarchy, right? You do job A, for 2 years, and then you go do job B, and then you do job C. And that conveys a very long journey to more interesting and meaningful work. And if employers can paint that picture around what they will learn or what an employee will learn and experience, more so than, hey, I need somebody that has 5 to 10 years of experience with these 15 skills and they can travel 50% in the very formal job description. That, again, employees, it's more around how they position and brand those opportunities, and it's a little bit more around, hey, if you come work for us, this is what you're going to gain out of it. These are the skill sets that you're going to gain. These are the opportunities that you can have. And we're in recruiting, if you have more of a profile of a type of person, of traits, characteristics of a person that is successful in your organization, less so, the skill set becomes less important because you can train that skill set, right? You can teach somebody how to run a cash register. You can teach somebody how to, use your CRM, your software. But what you really need is somebody with hard work ethic, that grit and resilience, that they're passionate around what they do, and if employers are shifting how they are recruiting people, I think you're going to see that that puts the balance of power a little bit back into the employer side. But if you're not going to change, if you're resistant to change, and we've talked to some companies that is a little bit of the mindset of, gosh, these younger generations, they think everything should be handed to them, and they want everything all about them. For those that are resistant to change, I think they're going to struggle getting that talent and keeping that talent in the organizations.
And I think that's analogous. Anybody that's a parent has used the phrase "because I said so," and that's a desperation move. It's difficult to move beyond that because then it becomes just a this or that situation. I think you're basically saying it's the same thing at work. You can't use that hierarchy.
That's a hard word to say.
It is a hard word to say. The stuff I'm higher than you to make decisions, and you're seeing good companies that have mixes of people in various groups of different ages, different skill sets, and it sounds like what it is. It's not so much as blowing up your entire way of thinking, but just having a little bit of context, and it's a communication skill in saying, I'm just going to talk to you a little differently because I want you to have the best context to succeed here.
Yes, and also thinking about, again, the traditional job requirements, right? Depending on what level it is, do you really need a 4-year degree? Do you really need a 2-year degree? I think a lot of the tech companies are moving to a skill set, especially on the coding and tech side, where they're not requiring you to have a specific degree. You do have, you have to go through a series of, you have to show that you've got skill set in coding and design, user design and all that. But that degree itself is becoming less important. And so, again, the skills and those rigid job requirements become more fluid.
And also related, I have to ask, this report was put out by the Network for Executive Women. New, thank you. So is there a focus at all on how skills might differ by gender? Or one of the things I know in the report talked about, don't even think that this new generation thinks very differently about gender than others. So this is not necessarily specific to women, but the new workforce that's coming out there.
No pun intended.
Yes.
It's always interesting using our acronym. I was new to new, but when we look, so there's a couple of points I'd love to make. So first, addressing the gender, most companies, and we are talking about C-stores, but most companies are evolving to being more technologically advanced. You have to have those tech and STEM skills to be really successful. And with all of the systems and the data that are being collected around customers and all the analytics, you are still running a retail outlet, but you're acting more like a tech company than you are a traditional retailer. And around diversity, there's so many efforts going into getting more women into technical roles into STEM. And in fact, there's so much more investment that's going on today, but women still only are making up 28% of STEM jobs. And to meet that goal, companies are going to have to figure out how to get more women into STEM. When we asked our survey participants, Gen Z females were seeking roles in technology at a much lower rate, so 34% than their male counterparts, which is 73%. So as some of these jobs are moving to require more skill sets in technology, if you're going to be driving diversity in your organization, you have to really think about that. It's going to be even harder to get women into the pipeline within organizations than it is today, and they don't want to go into those sorts of roles. So that's one. The second thing is that, yes, the makeup of Gen Z is the most diverse generation. it matters to them. So it's also not only around gender, your traditional notion of gender, so male and female, but also around the gender non-binary. And they are prioritizing that diversity across that race, gender, and orientation more so than any other generation. And they're also the most likely generation to have individuals that do identify as non-binary or a third gender. And that's really, really hard for a lot of the older generations to embrace. And so as a result, companies are not only going to have to represent that full spectrum of diversity in their marketing, but also in their workplace. And when you look up in a lot of the organizations that, that are part of NACS, you look and you see that it is very white and very male and tends towards older generations. And so as Gen Z is entering this workforce, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make those leadership ranks look more diverse. And those companies that are going to embrace that and are really making efforts towards getting women of color and people of color into leadership positions will be much more successful with Gen Z. When if you have employees and they look up and they say, wow, there's nobody like me in those leadership ranks, what that tells them immediately is, there's a hashtag, I think, see, if you can see her, be her. Well, same thing applies here. If I don't see anybody that's like me in organizations, then I don't feel like I'm going to be able to be successful in that organization. Or there's no path or role for me higher up than this level that I'm at today. So that's really, really important to them.
So that almost works its way right into the same you said earlier about it's more important to talk about, not more important, but it's important to talk about the company itself too. So, I mean, obviously this is when you're looking at the top tier leadership, you're looking at that company, but that's not going to be in the job description. But leading off a job description, almost like, I'll use our company. NACS is the association that blah, 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 blah. We help the community. We do everything else like that. And now, as I say, community, that's important. So it doesn't necessarily mean giving back in a charitable way, but I know that's something that is important. Being socially, not social media, but socially active within the community and whatnot is important to this generation. So as companies not only grow the way they do business, whether it's donating charity, giving back, volunteer hours, things like that, but it should fit into their mission and it could fit into their mission, vision, things like that about giving back. That would be attractive to this group or this generation, I should say.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes beyond giving back socially. It goes back to being a good corporate citizen. And that could mean, if you're producing products, that you're making sure that you're having sustainably sourced materials, that you have recyclable materials. If, for C stores, that you're pressuring your suppliers to have products that are recyclable, that you're encouraging recycling in your store. These are just some but even more environmental actions that you're making the world a better place, and that they can see that, and it's not just lip service. Because anybody can donate money to an organization, but to really drive change that benefits the whole world, you really need to be thinking about kind of humankind as a whole, and that you are contributing to making the world a better place.
And bragging about it too.
Sounds very esoteric. And absolutely, you have to be bragging about it. But moving from having plastic straws to having paper straws or no straws, or recycling utensils if you have dine-in in your C store. So if you have a food outlet. So thinking of things around those lines much bigger, and letting those Gen Zers work on those projects to get sustainability into stores.
And a lot of the research a lot of the things that you noted are things that we have collected at NACS and looking at research, why it's important to not only give back, but tell a story of it. We unpacked a lot in the last 20 minutes looking at all those hypotheses and paths forward. And just, I guess, as a final question, is there one message or one thing that you want somebody to think about related to Gen Z? So that's the first part. What can they do? What is that message that you suggest they start thinking about now? And then, of course, how can they learn more about this?
Absolutely. So for Gen Z, this is a lot of information we put in here, and you don't have to do everything all at once. I think the biggest thing is to get the Gen Zers in your company and have a robust conversation with them. How are they feeling about your company? How are they feeling? Would they recommend your company as a place to work to their peers? And that will give you a really great sense of, hey, how are we doing around attracting Gen Z? So I think that's number one. And the second thing is that you really assess where you are today and pick some of the tactics that we have in our report around things that they can do, and just pick a few of them and slowly start to implement those. You can test and pilot, and if things don't work, the great news is you have a little bit of a longer runway. These are things that you're going to have to change over the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. And if you start now, that's a really doable path to get there. So that's some things that C-stores can do. With regards to this report, you can access it on our website. It's www.newonline.org/Gen Z, and you can download it there.
Repeat that one more time so everybody that was looking for a pencil finally has one.
A pencil? Jeff, how old are you?
Yeah, old.
But does it have an eraser on it, too? www.newonline.org/Gen Z.
Well, thank you very much, Carrie Ann. We look forward to talking more about what we can do to learn from Gen Z and make our businesses grow. So thank you.
And thank you for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.